If you've got a classic car and you want to give it a chance to stretch its legs, why not come and join me on my Classic Car Track Day at Blyton Park on August the 11th. It is open to all vehicles introduced by the year 2000, with some exceptions, like Cobra and GT40 replicas. It is a calm, relaxed day with like-minded people, kept to very low numbers on track with approximately 10 at a time maximum. Spaces are already beginning to sell, but we still have plenty available, and we'd love to see you. Tickets are just £199, including VAT, and that gets you your entry, free photography, free tuition, and a free sim rig challenge on the day as well. Follow the link in the description down below for details on this and other events we are running throughout the year. Hello everybody, today is a good day, for I am behind the wheel of an Aston Martin DB6. A car that is, in every measurable way, terrible. And yet, we still love them. So this is the perfect opportunity then to do a little bit of petrol head philosophy and talk about why I think right now is a very important time for the DB6 and its ilk, because the times, they are a-changing, and if we're not careful, we might be about to lose cars like this forever, and that would be a shame. Enjoy. Of course, the first thought anybody will have when you look at something like this is that a DB5? No, it's not, sir. It is a DB6. And I'll tell you the easiest way to spot it. See that rear window? See how it kind of cuts off like that? Well, that's a DB6. The DB5 goes to a point. Now you know. There are other differences too, of course, but that is the easiest one to spot. It's also a bigger car than the DB5. They put a few inches in the wheelbase and made it a lot more practical. You could now call it almost a proper four-seater. And you know the really funny thing? If you talk to Aston Martin experts, most of them don't really lust after the DB5 themselves. You see, they consider the DB4 to be the sporty one, the DB6 to be the more practical tourer, and the DB5 the awkward middle child. It just so happens that's the famous one, and it's why today, if you want to buy a DB5, you'd have to pay £750,000. But if you want one of these, you can get it for less than 200 grand. All of a sudden, the DB6 just got interesting, didn't it? For sat right here, I've got the view out of a classic Aston Martin. I've got the soundtrack of a classic Aston Martin. I've got the correct badging with David Brown's name displayed proudly across the top of the Aston Martin wings. And, even better, today I am on familiar roads. The first and only time I drove a DB6, it was on ones I didn't know all that well. And I still enjoyed the car, because to be honest, when it comes to just about anything built before 1980, I don't really expect them to be brilliant to drive. Now, many of them are, and when they are, it's then a pleasant surprise. All I really wanted from my previous experience was for the car to look the part and make the noise, and it did. In fact, I'm just looking at it now, reflected in that barbershop window, and it's utterly resplendent. Looks fantastic too, in this original colour of Caribbean Pearl. And this is actually a lot better to drive than I think I remember. That might be because this one has the optional power steering. The engine is still a slightly pernickety affair. It does feel like it's going to die at any point in time if you don't keep the revs up. However, it does rev incredibly freely. 4 litres, 6 cylinders, and a trio of SU carburetors. Aston Martin claim it makes something like 280 horsepower. I'd take that with a pinch of salt if I were you. In the day, should you have wanted, you could have had the car uprated to Vantage specification. That would have given a claimed 330 horsepower. I suspect equally as optimistic. To get that to the road, you then had the choice of two gearboxes, a ZF 5-speed or a Borg-Warner 3-speed automatic, which is what this car started its life with. Now, it's got the ZF 5-speed. Apparently, there's even some bits of DB7 in the conversion, which was carried out by the car's current owner's uncle. He bought it back in the mid-1990s and paid the modern-day equivalent of £50,000 for it. See, back then, old Aston Martins, they were still worth something, but they weren't worth all that much. It spent much of its time in London, being used as the years went by increasingly sparingly, until, unfortunately, the gentleman passed away. Enter then Hugh, his nephew, who out of all of the family was the one that said, yeah, I'll take the car on. He's had it now for 18 months, and in that time done a fair bit of work. So the engine has been rebuilt. Crucially, the liners have been replaced, so now it can take unleaded fuel without requiring an additive, and he's done a few other bits too. Significantly, this car is what you'd term a survivor. It's never had a full restoration, and though if you're being picky, you'd say there are a few bits that do need work, by and large, for a car of this vintage, it's in spectacular condition. And speaking of vintage, this is a 1969, making it a DB6 Mark II. What's the difference? Well, there are some flared wheel arches, which I think actually look quite nice. From the factory, you also had wider rubber, and mechanically, it shares a few pieces with the contemporary DBS. In fact, the Aston Martin lineup at the time was a very, very odd affair, because you had this, the DB6, but then they introduced, in the late 60s, the DBS, which in theory was supposed to be the replacement for the DB6, having a V8. Only the V8 engine wasn't quite ready, so what they did was start selling with essentially the same engine as you get here. The difference being the DBS is an even bigger car again. This meant that with the DB6's engine, it was actually slower in straight-line tests, although they claimed, on account of the more advanced suspension, it was better across country roads. The V8 finally landed in 1969, though bizarrely, the straight 6-engine DBS still continued until 1972. The DB6 itself was then finally retired in 1971, and for 1973, an all-new car was introduced to replace both the DBS and DBS V8, being essentially a facelift of it, and called the Aston Martin V8. What a machine! It's a beautiful day today, the perfect conditions for a car like this, because it's nice and warm, but it's not too hot. One of the many creature comforts the car does without is air conditioning. But I have to say, I'm really impressed with this thing. Now, it has been fitted with a Harvey Bailey handling kit. Quite what that consists of, I do not know, but it does mean the thing's a little keener, and for a car of its age, it is surprisingly easy to drive. The gearbox is excellent. One, actually, I think, of the very best I've ever driven. Direct, precise, not a millimetre of slop in it. The throttle, beautifully responsive. Even the brakes, pretty decent too. Gotta remember, old tyres and no ABS. The steering wheel is enormous, as it is in all old cars, and it feels like you're trying to saw your own legs off in every bend. But that's part of the experience. Visibility is excellent, which is very good, of course, because you don't want to get into an accident, because you won't survive it. This car's also sporting a few modern creature comforts too, like a modern stereo hidden behind the panel down here, but still retains more than enough of its period charm. It's got seat belts, though I think, again, they wouldn't really do all that much if I needed them. And not only have you got a half-decent amount of room in the back seats, but you've got a fairly generously sized boot too. Owners of these old Aston Martins are also quite dedicated people, and they do like doing big trips in them. By modern standards, it's not that wide either, meaning if you find yourself on a narrow country road, it's not too difficult to place. And when you're driving an old Aston, everybody loves you, which is nice. I am wary of the fact that the tyres are vintage. They're from 2007, so I'm not going to push it too hard if you don't mind. The car not being especially valuable, but with the sentimental connection, it is irreplaceable. And so, I am incredibly grateful to Hugh for bringing it out. It sits alongside a slightly more modern classic, something he's also very much in love with, an E30 generation BMW 325i. But the truth is, even that kind of car, I think, isn't really one that many young people today are all that into. We might not like to admit it, but 1987 was a long time ago now, nearly 40 years. And in the last decade, there's been a bit of a shift in how and when people make their money. Before, it was fairly predictable. As you got older, you made a bit more, and so cars at higher prices were generally pitched at those who were a little bit older. You would have been shocked to see anybody under 40 driving the likes of a Porsche or a Ferrari. Now, it's pretty normal. Today, with the changing economy and the rise of social media, we're now seeing a lot of people making their money sooner. But while all of that's been happening, cars like this have been appreciating in value significantly. And so you wind up with a scenario where the likes of a DB5, once upon a time the sort of thing you could have bought for, well, cheap Porsche money, is now £1 million car. And though I'm never against the notion of a car appreciating, there's a lot of good that comes with it. When a car's worth more money, you're more likely to spend keeping it in good condition. However, there is a crossover point where a car appreciates beyond, generally speaking, let's say, its original value. And as soon as you're thinking of paying more than that, what tends to happen is either you really, really want this car and for whatever reason there aren't many of them, or investors have got involved. And this ruins everything. Because you see, those are the people that buy a car, not as a car, but as an asset. It could to them be a painting, it could be some gold bullion, it could be really anything. They've just bought it because today it's worth X, and they hope tomorrow it's worth 2X. And the tragedy here is that those cars are the ones that don't get seen, they don't get driven, and they don't get used. I wager nearly every single DB5 bought for £1 million has been tucked away in a collection and is almost never even seen, let alone driven. And the real insult is that those cars only survived, they only got to this point thanks to the dedication and to the hard work of people like Hugh's uncle, who bought these cars when they weren't worth all that much money, bought them when they knew running it was going to cost more than buying it, and they did it for the passion. But I did tell you, times they are a-changing, and it's true. Because, you see, values are driven by quite a few different things. Yes, on one hand, it's the investors, but the investors only buy these cars because there are those out there driving the prices up. And they do that by lusting after these cars. If we only spent on a car what it's actually worth, a Countach would cost you less than a 986 Boxster. But that's just not how the world works. Nor is it, I think, how the world should work. But what's happening is cars like this, which really are the cars of my father's generation, well, those people now, they're getting old, they're moving on, and they're certainly not buying these cars. And what can then happen is some cars that appear to be appreciating ad infinitum suddenly then stop. The last DB6 that I drove, I had to insure for £350,000. Today, there are a whole bunch of them available for 160. And what's really weird is that means that now you can have one of these for not just an awful lot less than a DB5, they're still big money, but also not really much more than a Jaguar E-Type. And these, I think, are always going to be considered the better car. Sure, they'll be expensive to live with. Yes, things can go wrong. But the good news with cars of this vintage, because just about everything in it was made by a bloke called Ken in a shed with a hammer, if Ken Jr. took up the trade, you're sorted. Let's take one of this car's descendants, the Mark I Vanquish. That's got circuit boards in it. Those are much harder to make, and if they break, and they can break, your car's bricked, and there's not a lot you can do about it. And I wager that if you were to ask a lot of young people, would they rather one of these or a Ferrari 458 Italia, they're going to go for Maranello's supercar every single day. However, young people are changing too, and the ones I meet are very, very interesting people. See, driving is no longer the default. Driving isn't something that everybody does, which means the people that do commit to it are into it for different reasons. They're growing up in a world where 20-mile-an-hour speed limits are commonplace. If you wanted a car to go to the pub on a sunny Sunday just to enjoy yourself, would you prefer the Ferrari or this? Look, there'll always be people that go for the Ferrari, but I think now a surprising amount of young people would go for this. The problem was, when one of these was £300,000 and the Ferrari was £100,000, that kind of made the decision for them. Today though, prices sinking might actually be the best thing to ever happen to a car like this. Because if we're being honest about it, is it a fast car? No. Is it especially well made? No. Is it reliable? No. Is it economical? No. Hugh's daughter refuses to go out in it because it stinks of petrol and leather. But does it look good? Yes. Does it sound good? Yes. Does it make you feel absolutely fantastic even when you're only doing 40 mile an hour in a 60? Yes, it does. If you enjoy driving, you'd enjoy the Aston Martin DB6. And as we live in the age of social media, if today's video inspires one well-heeled young person to maybe put down that Ferrari brochure, cancel the order on their GT3, and book an appointment with their Aston Martin specialist, well, job done. Because as far as I'm concerned, cars like this, they're a connection to the past. If the day ever came where people stopped driving these, I think I'd be as sad as knowing I'll never see a Spitfire flying again. There is something visceral, there is something emotional, there is something very British about it. And at any point in this video, have I cared that I'm not in a DB5? No. I'm in an old Aston Martin, and it's cool as heck. Thank you, Hugh, and thank you. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.